was having a hard time writing and recording at the same time. So I'm just going to talk us through problem number 3. We have cosine squared alpha minus 0.2 sine alpha equals 0.9. So one of our hints said to use the identities, if we can, to get it to be just like one trig function. And notice how we have sine and cosine. So I use a Pythagorean identity to replace cosine squared alpha, which is equivalent, to 1 minus sine squared alpha. So I replace that with that. So then all I have is sines instead of that cosine added in there. Now I'm going to take this one. Oh, first of all, I subtracted the 0.9 to the other side, so I have 0 over here. So then I can combine the 1 and the negative 0.9 together, so that gives me 0.1. So now I like to work with as few negatives as possible, generally make less mistakes that way. So these are negative, so instead I changed all the signs, so this is positive, positive, and that one's negative instead. Now you might recognize this is a quadratic because you have sine squared, you have a regular sign, and then you have a constant. And so you can call this the A term, the B term, and the C term, so that we have just a plain old regular quadratic we can use the quadratic formula with. Now remember, we're not like solving for x, we're solving for sine alpha. Think of it this way: if you do like a u substitution where u equals sine of alpha, you're replacing sine squared alpha with u squared, sine alpha with u, and you end up with this quadratic that you're solving using quadratic formula instead. So then after you've used quadratic formula to solve that, that means that the answers to that equal u, which also equals sine alpha. So here, I've written that here. So sine alpha equals the answers from the quadratic formula. Don't show the work here finding those answers. If you wanted to, you could just use an app on your iPods that allows you to solve using the quadratic formula. Just plug in the numbers into your iPod. I think it's the free Graph Calc, has a problem solver on it. You can just plug them in and it'll give you the answers. Okay. Then, because this is equal to sine alpha, we then have to do the inverse sine of that to get the actual number of degrees. So first we have a quadrant 1 answer, because that's what our calculator gives us for a positive value. And we have to also find the quadrant 2 answer, because sine is also positive in quadrant 2. Then we use the negative value we got from the quadratic formula, plug that into our calculator using inverse sine. Because inverse sine exists in quadrants 4 and 1, it gives us a negative answer. But we want, remember, our answer to be from 0 to 360. So we are going to take that answer and add 360 to it so that it's an answer between 0 and 360 instead in quadrant 4. And then there's also an answer for a negative in quadrant 3. So we also add 180 to that answer. Well, we're actually going to take the positive value of 25.6 and add that to 180 to get a quadrant 3 answer at 205.6. So there's our 4 answers.